There is no question that something is here, lurking, somewhere in the darkened corners. But how will we ever find out what it is? We need to look, always, and never stop. No matter what stands in our way. No matter what others may think. Explore the darkness. Shine light into it. Join the red strings and the silver threads. Everything is connected. Somehow. I am Mark L. Watson. This is Peer Beyond the Veil.
I had two events where I saw a physical, at the time they were called flying saucers. I don't think UFO was in the American lexicon at the time. I saw one in 1963 at age 8, and then again at 11, 3 years later. And I explained those in Incident at Devil's Den. And they were dramatic but brief sightings of UFOs. And then the other component, the other thing that was going on, and I really hadn't related the two, was the fact that I was being taken from my bed at night, and I was being transported somehow, I don't know how, to a white round room with a gray padded floor. And there were always the same group of kids there. They weren't kids from the neighborhood. They weren't kids from school. They were children I didn't know, but it was always the same bunch of us. We were always in our night clothing. And we were monitored, or there was a female entity there that I knew as Sue. I called her Sue. And I think I explained that I called her Sue because she appeared to be an Asian woman and reminded me of the woman Sue, who was Japanese and lived in back of us. So all of us kids called her Sue, but in retrospect and seeing her, she was not a human being. You would maybe, if she were dressed properly and had a big pair of sunglasses and a wig on, you might mistake her as a human being, but there was a bulbous back part of her head that was absolutely non-human, and her eyes were different as well. So, she was there, and she was kind of like the, I think that's why I saw her as a maternal-like figure. And when I saw her later on in my life, it was always kind of like good to see her. She was always very kind to us and very kind to these kids that were all there. And there are some things that I remember, just like being on that craft. I don't have a clear linear memory of everything that happened, but I do have bits and pieces. And writing the book and speaking about it seemed to open a door. And more memories have come back. And I have a friend who's a board certified psychiatrist here in Dallas, who explained to me, he says, that's the way it works. And, that really is kind of the right word. It's opening a doorway, because you can dredge this stuff up from your subconscious to your conscious memory. And that's what I believe has happened over the past couple of years.
Last year, in the previous season of the show, we spoke at length to Mr. Terry Lovelace. The story of his encounter at Devil's Den State Park in Washington County, Arkansas, is one of the most thrilling, terrifying, saddening, and completely convincing tales in the annals of extraterrestrial encounters. The tale of a young Mr. Lovelace and his friend Toby begins rather innocuously with a camping trip and ends with 2 lives completely ruined and more anecdotal evidence of a government cover-up than you're ever likely to hear in one place. Both men were split up from each other, sent their different ways, and would never talk again. But the story doesn't end there, and nor indeed does it start there either. After publishing a contact email address in the back of Incident at Devil's Den and asking those with similar stories to contact him, Terry Lovelace was inundated with incredible tales from hundreds and hundreds of others who'd had encounters with beings and entities of other worlds. And so, after compiling them together, Terry put pen to paper once more. He fleshed out the original tale, reaching back into his own past to piece together some of the building blocks which prefaced his encounter at Devil's Den, and shared some of the most incredible tales which had been shared with him. For those unfamiliar with Terry's story, it is advisable before listening to this episode to either go back and listen to the first one, titled The Terror of Devil's Den, which can be found in our back catalogue, or even better, by Terry's own works, The Incident at Devil's Den, which is available on Amazon and other stockists. It's a great pleasure to welcome the fantastic Terry Lovelace back to the show again tonight to talk about his second book, The Reckoning, and to expand a little on just how many of you out there have stared at the stars in wonderment and terror, knowing that it is with some ease that we peer beyond the veil.
So yeah, my childhood was filled with nightmares, night terrors about what I called the monkey men. Because, when you're a child, you use childish terms to describe things. But what was interesting was in the back of Incident at Devil's Den, I included an email address. And I said, look, I'm not a doctor or a therapist, but if you had a really strange event in your life, contact me. I'd like to hear about it. And I've got over 1,600 individuals now who've contacted me by email.
Yeah,
and
I remember when we spoke last time, you said you just had an overwhelming response from
3 today. And I had people all the time write me and said something about your book triggered memories for me. And that's, that makes it feel like a responsibility on my end. But these people are so credible, so believable. And, I saw little monkeys. These people write to me and tell me that they saw owls, they saw orbs of light, they saw little gray men, any number of creatures. There was a kid in El Paso, Texas, down by the Mexican border, that I spoke with. I put a story in the back of my book, The Reckoning, and he claimed that a walking possum or opossum would visit him at night, that it would come through the screen window as an orb and then turn into this possum. And he told his mother, he told me on the phone, it walked on 2 legs like a man. It did not walk like an animal. And it spoke to him telepathically, but he had trouble remembering what it told him, but he knew it was important.
So there's a point that you touch on when in The Reckoning that, with regards to the kind of monkey-like figures that you saw and the crossover between maybe the clowns that you mentioned in one of the yes. stories from one of the other experiencers who contacted you, is that the possibility, the reasonable possibility that the entities, whatever they are, would be assuming a form which is of less, which is of comfort to the experiencer, something that is going to provide them a little bit of comfort. So when they appear in the room of a child, a monkey is less threatening than whatever a real form may be.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on and well said. My phrase is they appear in a way the child will find most benign. And at some level, I think they know what the child will perceive as most benign. And that speaks volumes to the level of influence that these things can have over us. That's genuine. That's a little scary, but that's genuine.
And there's also a question, and this obviously isn't one that we can answer just talking now, though I wish, as to whether the entity could physically change their form into the physical manifestation of something new, or whether they can just affect your consciousness and your perception in a way that they may still appear to be their original form, but actually what they're doing is that they have the ability to adjust your mind so that only in your mind are they a monkey or a clown or a possum.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a good point. And I have a theory about that based on my conversation with the mother of the little boy, we had a conversation via an interpreter. She doesn't speak English. I don't speak Spanish. So, but we had a very good conversation. And she told me that she was so disturbed by her son's, night terrors that she slept on a sofa adjacent to her son's open bedroom door. And he's 6, 7 years old enough to carry on a conversation now. And she was watching late night television, or no, she was watching a videotape. Doesn't matter. She was on the sofa, and she saw this orb of light come through the window. And the orb, buzzed around the room. Kids scream. She jumps up. On one occasion, on the first occasion, she fell back asleep. Interestingly. Before she could get up and go investigate. But she saw a glowing white orb. The kid claims that it transformed into the possum. So mom saw the white orb, kid saw the possum. I think that really kind of tells us that
fascinating.
They're controlling the kid's mind. They're not transforming actually. And probably had they had enough time or enough, I'm surprised they didn't control mom's mind. I don't know what they would have appeared like,
but maybe they did in obviously sending her back to sleep. It's also something that I've heard from anecdotal stories and a couple of people I've spoken with that I can't remember who I heard speaking. She was on Jim Perry's show, and she was telling this fascinating story. She was an experiencer, and she was a lifelong contactee experiencer. Yeah. And she had a tale when she woke up in the middle of the night. She walked into her daughter's room. Her daughter was young, in a crib. I don't know how old. Yeah. Realized she was gone, panicked, and went back to bed. And then woke up again in a fright, however long later, and thought, oh my God, she's still gone. Ran back through there. She's now back in the cot. And the kid apparently has no memories. This is her memory.
Yes.
And so the question there is, no, a parent, even a bad parent, wouldn't realize their kid's been removed from the cot for no reason in the middle of the night and go back to sleep. You wouldn't even be able to get back to sleep, but she did. And so the point there is, she was clearly made to go back to sleep.
She was. And, of all the bizarre things that have happened to me over a lifetime and all the UFOs that I've seen, my wife has had just one weird experience in her life. And that was in 1987. She woke up in the middle of the night and reached over for me, and I wasn't in bed, and the bathroom light wasn't on, and she was going to get up and hunt for me. She just had an unsettled feeling. And she said that at the end of the bed, silhouetted against the window behind her, was just a petite little woman. And the woman said to her telepathically, everything's fine, go back to sleep. And that's what she did.
Yeah. And the rational mind would never accept that. Your wife would never see anyone telepathically or otherwise, would never find somebody in her bed at night and go back to sleep, in her bedroom at night and go back to sleep.
No.
Scream, who the hell are you? Get out of my house. Any of us would.
So, or shot them. Yes.
Yeah, sure. So that's the telepathic control of one's consciousness, perception, mind, whatever you want to term it. So would you class that as necessarily being her experience, or did she witness yours?
Well, I wasn't in bed. I don't think I was in the house. I don't know where I was. This happened to be the evening before the motorcycle ride that I went on, where I lost 2 hours of time. Missing time is such an amazing thing to experience that I think that you can have missing time and never even realize it. I was on a motorcycle doing probably 70, 75 on a country road. And I was coming up to a turn, and I throttled back to about 60. And then it seemed like I just blinked, and I'm on a road doing 30 miles an hour, a gravel road doing 30 miles an hour, with just in the middle of cornfields on either side of me. And I blamed it on just being absent-minded, because number one, I would never take my bike on gravel. And two, I can be absent-minded if I get, thinking about work and other things.
Sure.
So I just attributed it to that. Then I got home and found out that I'd been missing for 2 hours and had a hysterical wife at home. But they took me then, and where I went during those 2 hours was they picked me up in a saucer. I was with Betty, also known as Sue. They're one and the same. I refer to them interchangeably by that name. And we went to that bigger ship, as I describe it, and we talked with our minds telepathically, like we did when I was a child, and it felt as natural as anything in the world. Yeah, the contact just continues. It goes on and on. In my book, I think I described the April 16th, 2009 incident, where I was asleep in my bed and I woke up in a panic and absolutely out of breath. I was starved for oxygen. And I thought I was having a heart attack because I've had them before. And I told my wife, I didn't have any chest pain. I told my wife, call 911. I think I'm having a heart attack. And she did. But one thing I should explain first, and that is, I don't think I had told this story before. I sleep with an iPhone in my pocket, and I've been doing this it's shielded against EMF because of my heart disease. But I've been doing this since back in the days of the Sony Walkman. And I blame it on PTSD, because if I don't listen to meditative apps or binaural beats or, Hypnosync music or something, I'll hear a noise in the middle of the night and absolutely freak out. I mean, I still sleep with the light on. So I sleep with a t-shirt with a pocket in it. And I put this in the pocket and I listen with my earbuds to a meditative app at night. And that's how I get to sleep and how I stay asleep. And it masks the noises around me. So when I woke up, I sat up in bed, like I say, gasping for breath, and my earbuds are on my chest. The medics come, they take me to the hospital. When they get there, my oxygen saturation is like 96% instead of 100%. My blood pressure was really through the roof, like 220 over 110. And my pulse was tachycardic, 170 or something. And they load me into the ambulance and put me on oxygen and take me to the hospital. And 45 minutes later, my blood pressure is back to 120 over 80 within normal limits. My breathing is down. My oxygen saturation is back at 100%. And I feel fine. And I mean, I know the drill. It's going to be, they draw blood for cardiac enzymes, they do a chest x-ray and an EKG. Those are the three things they do if they think you're having a heart attack. And those all came back negative. So they kept me until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then they kicked me out and they sent me home and said, you must have had just an errant beat of your heart. It's the only thing we can think of. Made an appointment to see my cardiologist and blah, blah, blah. So we get home, had dinner. I felt fine. And I told my wife, I'm going to go out and do my walk. I normally walk a half a mile or a mile after dinner. And I go outside and I hit the health app on my phone because I try to walk X number of steps per day every day. And there's a picture of there's a screenshot of the health app in the reckoning. And it shows that, now I woke up at 5:55 a.m. I clearly saw the clock when I woke up. My phone says that between 5:23 and 5:24 a.m., I climbed 6 flights of stairs. And I did it within that 1 minute period. There's a single spike that goes from, there's an XY graph, the X graph going from left to right showing passage of time. And then the Y graph ascends in 10-foot increments showing height for stairs climb. And they measure it. It's not by GPS. They measure it by changing barometric pressure, which kind of blew me away. I didn't know that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they say it's accurate within inches. And So normally, because I can't climb 6 flights of stairs in less than a minute, like if I climb 4 flights of stairs at the parking garage or something, I'll climb a flight of stairs, it'll show a readout, and then, time will pass on that X graph, and then it'll show the next readout will be a little taller because I climbed another flight. And then it gives a stair step type readout. And this was one single red bar, and I did not understand that. Plus, I at 5:55 a.m., I woke up. Between 5:23 and 5:24, I was fast asleep next to my wife, or so I thought. So I include the screenshots of both screens in the book. I think I put my medical bills in there too, and de-identified them and put them in there. Because if it's a hoax, it was a very expensive one. But I took the phone to Apple and I asked them, can you check out my phone? Something's wrong with my phone. I got this readout, and they checked out my phone. There's nothing wrong with my app. There's nothing wrong with my phone. And I asked the lady there, I said, pardon me, what does that mean? She says, it means that this phone was 60 feet above your house at 5:23 a.m. on April 16, 2019. I mean, it's anecdotal evidence of, being a lawyer, I'd be a little picky. I wouldn't call it empirical evidence, but it's certainly anecdotal evidence that I went up.
Yeah.
And I believe I did. I have no memory. She was one of the most credible people that ever contacted me. And she's 76 years old. Her husband passed away in 1983. This incident happened in 1968. And she was married to a gentleman who was a nephrologist, a kidney doctor in Las Vegas, Nevada. And they had friends in Reno, Nevada, which is a couple hours drive north and west from Las Vegas. And like most physicians, he worked 60, 70 hours a week. But once a month, he had a 4-day weekend. And on that 4-day weekend, they would typically, every month, drive from Las Vegas, Nevada to Reno to visit friends and relatives and just have a good time. And they would stop every time at the halfway point. And the halfway point is a little town called Tunapa. And there was a kind of like a truck stop, gas station, restaurant there, because at that time, back in March of 1968 is when they did it, when they made this drive. There was really nothing there but desert and sagebrush, with this little town stuck in the middle. And it's still there. I had a friend who went on a vacation and made a point to make that drive for that purpose. And it's still there. It's not called the Stagecoach anymore. It's now called the Station, but it's the same structure, same building. And he spoke with a waitress there who was elderly, who remembers it being the Stagecoach. So that validates her story. This woman was from Henderson, Nevada, and she reached out to me on an email, and she says, with the usual disclaimer, please don't think I'm crazy. I know you're going to think, that kind of disclaimer. And then she says, it's important that I share this with someone before I pass away, because I guess at age 76, you are in tune to your own mortality. And we communicated back and forth a little bit through email. And she said, I can do email, but I'd be much more comfortable on a telephone call. And I said, well, yeah, so would I actually. So we ended up having an hour-long telephone call. And this woman was, she was cognitively intact. She was well-educated, well-spoken, and like I said, she was a very reliable witness. And she said that they made this trip, and they stopped at the Stagecoach as they did. They got a late start because her husband got stuck at the hospital. So they usually make it a daytime trip and avoid traffic, where they ended up not getting out of town until late. So it was nighttime. And they stopped at the Stagecoach. They had dinner. And I asked her, I said, did you have anything alcoholic to drink? No, we didn't drink anything. Do you wear eyeglasses? And did Paul wear eyeglasses? Nope, neither one of us. We had perfect vision back then, And I asked her, I said, what kind of car were you driving? Did it have tinted windows? You know, were you sleep deprived? Were you taking any medication? All the things that I could think of that might have influenced her experience that day, and came up with all negatives. And she said they finished their meal, they got back on the road and headed out of town, and 10 miles out of Tonopah, they saw this glow of light in the distance. And as they got closer to it, she said it was a small box-like store. And interestingly, she and her husband both agree on all of the details except for one. She clearly remembers it being a brick structure, and her husband remembered it being a wooden structure. I find that interesting. And on top of the plane, it had in green neon lights, Christmas. And this was 1968. She said she'd never seen a store devoted to the holiday before. And she said that light was just pouring out of this place, out of every window. And they could see movement. And she asked her husband to pull over. And he pulls off onto the shoulder of the road, directly opposite of the thing. And they could see shadow movement. So it looked like maybe workmen were in there, or they were open. And she said, I don't know if they're open or not. Why don't we try? And she told her husband to pull in. And he's like, where? There is no driveway. And then they're looking closer, and there's no parking lot. It's just sagebrush and sand. And there's no back entrance that they can see. And this place is covered, in her words, 1 million twinkling Christmas lights wrapped all around the building. And while she's watching it, she said that there was a few moments there where, quote, she and Paul zoned out. And I said, what do you mean by zoned out? And she says, I don't know. There's a minute or two we just felt funny. And I said, do you think you could have had missing time? And she answered, how would one know? And, that's kind of a good question. And I said, well, do you think it was possible? And she says, yeah, I think it was possible. So they watched this thing for a while, and then they went on about their trip. They drove the rest of the way to Reno. But uncharacteristically, she slept the whole way. And these 4-day weekends were very important time for this young couple at the time, because that was time when they had to converse and catch up on their week and the like. And she usually never slept in the car. She slept all the way from Tonopah to Reno. And they felt kind of out of sorts for about 24 hours, but then felt back to normal. And on their way back, she said to her husband, let's stop. I want to see that Christmas store again. And actually, it was her husband, I think, that brought it up and said, let's stop by that Christmas store. And because both of them had been thinking about it, but neither one of them had voiced it to the other. And they did. They made a point of finding this Christmas store. So they get, 12 miles outside of Tonopah, and they're looking. And of course, it was nighttime, so things look a little different. But they've made that trip dozens of times, so they're very familiar with the terrain. And they think they know right where it's at. And there's nothing. Of course, there's nothing there. Nothing there. And, they went so far as to the next weekend, they went back and tried to find it again. And drove up and had lunch at the stagecoach. And by chance, the gentleman who ran the Tonopah Chamber of Commerce happened to manage the stagecoach inn. So he was there, and he spoke with them. And she asked, when did you guys get a Christmas store north of town? And he said, I don't know what you, he was very kind, but he said, I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, yeah, we saw a lit up Christmas store just north of town. And he says, well, if there were any new construction, new business, I would know about it. And I can tell you there's not. The only new business we've had is a florist 8 months ago. And he said, there's certainly nobody out on the highway. So that kind of stunned them. And afterward, her husband refused to talk about the subject in any way, shape, or form, would not discuss it. She, however, both of them actually, she said, had nightmares about it for years, all their lives. And, maybe 1 or 2 a year, but they had them consistently. And I said, well, Olivia, what do you dream about that's so frightening? And she says, I know this doesn't sound scary, but for some reason, it, quote, scares the pants off of me. She said, in my dream, I'm sitting in the car staring at this thing, this building, and there's bright lights on inside, and I can see movement, shadows through the windows. And for some reason, she said the shadow movement behind those windows, she just flips out. And that's the substance of her nightmare. So, and then I ask her the final question, well, Olivia, do you think that you saw a spaceship? And she laughs and then says, yeah, I do. You know, I don't think 76-year-old women make up fairy tales. I just think that I believe that this happened to her. And be it a screen, I think it had to be a screen memory of some sort. It was certainly, I believe it was a spaceship. I believe it was cloaked, or their memory were screened, one or the other.
Yeah. It goes back to the thing we were saying earlier about taking on the form of a possum or a monkey.
Yeah.
That it's a more welcoming thing to see a Christmas store, albeit in the desert in March. It explains the thousands of twinkling lights a lot easier than an extraterrestrial craft would, wouldn't it? So
it would indeed. You know, I had about 400 really good stories to choose from, and I chose a couple that had good screen memory representations, because I just think they're interesting. I find them real interesting. In one of the stories, I talk about a lady who's a nurse anesthetist. In this country, if you're a registered nurse, I don't know about where you live, but if you're a registered nurse, you can apply to a program that will teach you to administer anesthesia. So you work under the guidance of a MD or regular medical doctor's supervision, but you can operate as an anesthesiologist. So, and it's a cream of the crop kind of thing. They only pick the best of the best for this program. And I got a call from this woman, and she told me she was a nurse anesthetist, and I was able to verify that with the board of nursing. Found her name. She's, I think, 67. She's a couple of years past where you would normally retire. And she and her partner, she's going to retire soon. This story goes back to when she was 9 years old. When she was 9, she had a younger sister. I'll call her Molly. I call her Julia and Molly. She requested I not use her name. So Julia was 9, Molly was 7, and every summer they went to their grandfather's property, their maternal grandmother's property in Oklahoma. And they had a big farm, and they had a big, beautiful farmhouse. And there was a dirt berm, like a raised road, 12 feet high, made out of dirt, with a road on top. So, you know, Grandpa could drive his tractor across this road. And that 12-foot high wall of dirt separated the front yard from the backyard. And the girls knew they could do anything they wanted in the front yard. They could play all they want. But the rules were they couldn't go into the backyard because, they had an oil well back there that was, you know, machinery operating. They had farm animals, farm equipment, but most strikingly, they had a 12-foot deep farm pond. And they were concerned that the girls might go back there and drown. So the girls knew the rules. They'd done this every year since they were infants. And she said they were outside, you know, just chasing butterflies. It's around the noon hour. And she said that they heard calliope music. I don't know if calliope is, in the States, there used to be these traveling circuses, that would travel from town to town, like on a circuit. And they had this thing called a calliope, which was a steam-powered organ.
Yep.
Yep, with the big pipes. And And that was that was kind of the theme song of the circus. They would play this thing, and people would hear and recognize the music immediately and associate it with circus. So the girls heard this music, and the little one Molly says, "It's a circus," and Julia's like, "Yeah, it sounds like a circus." And of course, where's the music coming from? The opposite side of the road, where they're not supposed to go. So Molly, who I think would have made a good lawyer, said, she said, well, you know, Grandpa said we can't go in the backyard, but he didn't say we couldn't stand on top and look over. And so Julia says, okay, well, let's just go look. And if there's a circus back there, we'll go ask Grandpa if we can go. So that was the plan. So they climbed this dirt berm and got to the top of it, and they're standing there looking over. And here, next to the pond, she said, just to the right of the pond, was a carousel, a thing that, you know, goes around in circles and has the horses that go up and down. And is carousel the right word for it?
Sure. Yeah.
So they have they see this carousel, and she said it was crazy because it was off the ground. It was at least 3 feet off the ground, because she remembers the distinct shadow underneath, because it was about noon and it was perfectly round shadow underneath it. And she said it was spinning so fast no one could safely get on or off this thing. And she said that it looked like the horses were alive. And she said that, just like Olivia, she said this thing was lit up with like 1,000 little twinkling lights all around it. And she said they were just mesmerized. They were just enthralled to see this thing. And they laid down next to one another and held hands and laid in the grass and just watched this thing. And then they blacked out. Well, while they're blacked out, they were taken somewhere, because Grandma and Mom come outside to get the girls for lunch, and they're not in the front yard. Well, then they start calling for them, and they can't imagine that they would be disobedient and go in the backyard. They just really didn't believe that would happen, but that's the assumption that they made. So they're really, really panicked. And they called neighbors. They called a church organization and a veterans organization that the grandpa was affiliated with, asking for volunteers. And they called the police, and they had a sheriff's department out there, and 100 volunteers helping to look for these girls, and they can't find them anywhere. So 2 hours pass, and the sheriff says, I'm going to get a guy out here in a john boat. A couple guys that I know are going to bring a john boat out, and we're going to dredge the pond. And of course that everybody just breaks down after that news. And they did. They had 2 guys show up with a shallow john boat, go out onto this pond, and they had these long poles, and they're stirring up the water to see if anything floats to the top. And while they're doing this, one of the guys on the boat glances at the shore and then goes back to what he was doing. And then when he glances up again, the girls are there. They're laying there in the grass on the side of this hill. And of course, he yells out, "We got them!" And everybody thinks they found them in the pond, and everybody freaks out. And obviously, and people come running, and it's all good news. And the girls are sound asleep and trouble waking them up. And they're like, "Where did you go?" And she says, "We told them the truth." "I don't know." They thought it was lunchtime, and they didn't know what all the excitement was about. But the curious thing was that there were distinct changes from them. They, according to Julia, they, quote, left their changed little girls. Julia had always struggled with math in school and was a solid, C student, not exceptional, according to her. But she says that when they got back, that she went back to school, and they started studying fractions. And she says, "I thought, oh, this stuff is easy." Well, suddenly she went from being moderately inept at math to being a math genius. And she can't explain that. But it made a tremendous difference in her life. And she claims that whatever happened to her affected her mental abilities, and that her words that while she loved her profession, in hindsight she thinks that she could have been easily been an MD or a medical doctor instead of a nurse practitioner. So and then Molly, her younger sister, had the misfortune in the family. She went back from this trip kind of an angry, sullen little girl, very atypical, not characteristic of her at all. And her personality was totally changed. And she was unfortunately diagnosed as having bipolar disorder, was diagnosed with mental behavioral mood disorder of some kind, and had a very hard life. Where Julia seemed to have a blessed life. And the difference between that is strange. And I asked her, I said, well, when you guys got home, did you talk about what happened to you? Did you ever discuss? And she says, and this is hard to believe, but I understand it. She says, we never, ever spoke of it. Never. And she said that her sister this was 4 years ago now, had terminal breast cancer. And she took leave from her job to be with her while she was in hospice. And, they were never really close. They were much closer as sisters before this incident. And afterward, they kind of grew apart. And that seems to be a common theme too. My friend Toby and I drifted apart.
That was actually going to come on a little bit more specific to the exact point you're going to make, and with the exact reference of yourself and Toby as well. That it does seem to be such a common theme of people who have been experiencers with a cohort. There was the other story about the guys who were that were hunting hogs in the woods, and they went out with the RV, and never went away together as that group ever again. Didn't really speak. Went their separate ways. It was never discussed. It's the same thing that comes up again and again.
It does.
Whilst obviously you were instructed initially not to have any dealings with Toby, not to go to his house, not to talk it, and obviously that was a little bit out of your hands. You also said yourself you felt differently about him and towards him, though maybe not quite as strongly as some of these other stories are showing. But what is that? What have you reached even a half theory as to what that would be?
The only thing that I can conclude is that it's, again, speaks to the level of influence these things have over us. I can't reconcile those emotions. I've always considered myself to be a loyal and good friend and a decent human being. And, just to write somebody off my friend list, and it should be exactly the opposite. Two people have this shared experience where they, fear for their lives, both suffer injury, see something that most people will never, ever see in their life, and have this experience. And then human nature is that we should have been debriefing about it all the way home. We should have been, man, did you see what I saw? And what about those little gray guys? And, we should have been validating each other's story and bolstering the story. And there was none of that.
Therein is perhaps the problem, though, that once you begin to validate each other's story, it takes on more of a truth. Now, obviously, you're always aware of what your own truth is, but once you begin to cross-reference each other, you begin to pick up on this. I remember that. Oh, I remember that. Then It takes on a form. Now, all of a sudden, everyone's discussing these things. There's less. It's less hidden. And clearly the whole point of screen memories, of missing time being taken and actually being returned to a place. Many will experience missing time and not actually know what happened in that middle bit. Some will. Some remember, well, in that time, I thought I was maybe only aboard the spaceship for 10 minutes. but it was 5 hours, or Betty and Barney Hill thought they were up there for an afternoon and it was 6 days or whatever, that story. But many just won't remember. Many will just have the lost time, maybe an odd feeling, and not have that middle memory. And perhaps these forced feelings of animosity towards somebody who would have been in that experience with you is perhaps to stop those memories from surfacing, or
No, I have a theory about that, and I mean, who knows? It's certainly just an assumption on my part, but I think the danger is not remembering. That's the danger, I think, because I think for those folks that don't remember and have no memory whatsoever, that can be stuffed down into their subconscious minds and can, over the years, filter back up into their conscious memory in the form of nightmares and manifest in all kinds of unhealthy ways, like alcoholism or you pick them. So I think it's much healthier to have an idea what happened to you than to be left with no idea whatsoever. Yeah. And, back to Julia and Molly, just real quick, while Molly was dying, Julia asked her, can we talk about what happened at Grandpa's? And she said her sister turned her head to the wall on the opposite side and said no. And, she passed away the following day. But even on her deathbed, she would not discuss it. And what an opportunity lost that was for them both to validate each other's experience. There's an author named Robert Hastings who wrote a famous book called Ufos and Nukes about 15 years ago. And I got to know him. And he's interviewed literally thousands of people who were active duty military, especially on bases that had nukes. Now, we weren't on the base when we were abducted, but he said that it is standard procedure across all armed forces that if 2 or more people, and there's a distinction, if 2 guys see a silver disc dart across the sky, that's one thing. They'll probably be called in and say, you saw something, well, don't talk about it, or we'll send you for a psychological evaluation, that's not right, and be dismissive about it, and, nothing big will happen. But if 3 or more people see the same thing, or if 2 people have an experience like Toby and I did on that level of intimacy, the government will absolutely make sure that they bust up. They'll ship one direction, one to the other. And I believe on the federal level in this country, on some way, there's a file somewhere that said these 2 guys shouldn't get together.
To add conspiracy to that is actually just a continuation of whatever psychological effect is being put in place to make you feel those feelings and of not wanting to have anything to do with Toby, or the guys on the hog hunt not really liking each other on the drive home and not wanting to talk about it and not wanting anything else to do with each other. And that was the last time they all got together socially, and they went their separate ways. That whatever the psychological effect there is actually just a very similar thing to what the government is doing, which again touches back on this: how much crossover is there between these experiences and the control or influence of government, if you want to call it government.
There's a famous book by a gentleman named Ray Fowler called The Allagash Four. And Allagash is a river in Maine. And there's a big lake there. And these 4 guys, they were twin brothers. And you know how close twins are. James and Jack Weiner. and then a gentleman named Rack, and I forget the fourth guy's name. But the four of them had been tight. I mean, they were friends. They went fishing, they went rafting, they were just, they got together and hung out. And they went on this trip that they planned for a while. And for those who may not know their story, it's a famous story. In 1973, I believe, is the year. And there's no association with the military or the government in this story, which makes it a little more interesting, I think. And in the Allagash Fours story, they set up a campsite, and they were experienced campers, and they gathered a ton of firewood, and they made the 6-foot-tall pyramid of firewood and to burn for 6 hours. And they did that so that they could find their way back from shore, because in the middle of the night out on the lake, they wanted to fish at night. And if you're out in the middle of the lake and it's at night, shore looks all the same. So with this, it was like a lighthouse. It was a way to find their way back to their campsite. So they left and they went out in an aluminum canoe, and they saw something in the sky they thought was the moon. And then it became obvious it wasn't the moon. It was a moving white light that came over the horizon. And then it showed it. There was a spotlight that came out of the thing that, quote, I think it was Jack Weiner who said it. He said it lit up the inside of that canoe, which was aluminum, like crazy. And he said they were all panicked, and they were all just scared to death, and they are paddling like mad towards shore. Next thing they know, I don't think they even realized the passage of time, but next thing they know, they're calm and they're slowly paddling towards shore. And this campfire that was just like a raging, 10-foot tall flame is now burned to embers. So hours have passed. And they made their way to shore and parked the canoe and said good night. And just like the guys on the pig hunt, the next day they went home, and then they gradually all kind of drifted apart. And one of the Weiner brothers was having nightmares, terrible nightmares, alien, like abduction related nightmares. And he calls his twin and he says, you know what, I've been really plagued by these crazy nightmares, and you're going to think I'm nuts, but let me tell you about them. And he did. And his twin says, oh my God, I had that exact same dream. So then they got a psychiatrist involved who they talked to and told the story. And they were hypnotized, and they did a hypnotic regression, and eventually all four of them were polygraphed and passed, and all four of them were subject to hypnosis and did a hypnotic regression separately and apart, and all told the same story. And it's the typical abduction story. They were taken out of the canoe, they were disrobed, they were prodded and examined, and by terrifying non-human entities. And that's the point, that they drifted apart too. Yeah, I like that because the military wasn't involved in that. But yeah, if the military's involved, for sure, they bust people.
Same crossover points between all these stories. There are some which all link with missing time. There are some which link with screen memory. There are some which link with this shared kind of animosity and reluctance to talk to each other or to talk about it. Certainly all the memories, the later memories, the nightmares, the dreams, while they maybe don't all cross over with each other, there are only 4 or 5 main tropes to the experience, and they all feature one or more, and a lot of them all. There's way too much evidence to be turning
Dismissed.
down, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'm a data-driven guy. I like data. And what I did was I used an Excel spreadsheet, and I did a and evaluation of these things, looking for commonalities. And I was amazed at the demographics that came up. And what I found was that the people that were, in my mind, most credible, most reliable, most believable on all levels were over age 50. And that surprised me. The other demographic that shocked me was this. And I would ask your audience, has anyone ever had a dream between the ages of 4 and 7, or maybe 3 and 6, somewhere in that range? Have you ever had a dream that you've remembered for a lifetime, irrespective of your age? If you're 20, if you're 90, I don't care, but you've remembered this dream all your life, and it's as vivid in your mind today as it was back when you were age 4. And the dream may not even make any sense, but it's there. And those are the people that tell me abduction stories. That's a common thread that runs through them. And, I contacted each and every one of these people and I said, okay, so you've had this odd dream at 4. Can you tell me, what did you get for Christmas that year? I don't remember. Who attended your birthday party? Don't have the slightest idea. What was your teacher's name? Don't have a clue. Everything else is gone. But this stupid little dream has stuck with them. And those seem to be the people that end up having experiences, either abduction experiences or incredibly cool sightings of things. And that seems to be a commonality, which makes me think, after my experience, that I think some people may think at age 50 they're having the first experience of their life. But I might question that and wonder, is there more going on in your life than you know? Has more happened than is in your conscious memory? I think that's likely.
So having obviously written the first one, then adding into the epilogue at the end, the invitation to be contacted by anyone with similar stories, and then receiving hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories of various levels of credibility, many were, as you say, incredibly credible. You've obviously done a tough piece of work to siphon them down into the few that you could include in the second book, but I'm sure you have hard drives full of more fascinating material.
I sure do.
Since you've kind of entered into the world that you're in now, how has it changed your life? I don't mean in terms of recognition for the book, but have you found?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Actually, I never envisioned finding myself. I'm an inadvertent UFO researcher now, and I never saw myself in that role. I found myself as a witness, not a researcher. But I've just become obsessed now with. And you know what? It's not just UFOs, and I thought it was, but it's not. I got letters from people who've had near-death experiences, who've said, this is going to sound odd, but have you considered the parallels between our two experiences? And I really hadn't. And then I've had people from the Bigfoot community. And there's a big, in this country, at least, there is a big, vibrant Bigfoot community that's in Dogman and all kinds of cryptoid weird things. I've never seen anything like that. But they have these experiences, and they have very similar experiences. They're out in the woods, suddenly things fall silent. And then they have an experience with a non-human entity. Sounds pretty familiar to me. Yep. And then sometimes
Joshua Cutchin. You aware of Joshua Cutchin's work?
No, I'm not.
2 books with Jeremy Renner that came out last year, called Where the Footprints End.
I've heard of the book.
So I spoke with him last week. The episode I put out last Friday was Joshua Cutchin, who talks a lot about this weird crossover between Bigfoot, or the Bigfoot phenomena, not necessarily Bigfoot being a creature, but the wider phenomena, and the crossover with technology, the crossover with UFOs, how frequently the two might be seen either in the same vicinity at the same evening, how often what we perceive to be maybe a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch is seen with lights, with holding orbs, holding technology, these
Yes.
very weird things that really just jar with the theory of him being an as yet undiscovered ape, but a physical creature, and all the crossovers about how he may not be a physical creature, and this is his 2 books on why. So very interesting.
It is very interesting. And, you know, I think I've kind of had an epiphany here, and that is that after reading all of these stories and after talking to all of these people, I kind of view the universe a little differently. I mean, I think I used to, no, I know I used to view the universe from a Newtonian physics kind of standpoint of, you know, rocks and solid objects circulating and obeying the laws of gravity, and space being pretty much a void. And I don't see it that way anymore. I really don't. I think it's much more complex than that. You know, I'm not a physicist. I couldn't solve for X to save my life, but I can read about the theory. You know, I can understand it without having to work the equation. And I look at dark energy and dark matter, which on paper makes up something like 94 to 96% of everything in the universe. So everything that we can perceive, you know, dogs and cats and cars and kids and earth and microbes and stars, all of that put together is 4% of our reality, and everything else is hidden from us. And I just wonder what's out there that's just beyond our ability to perceive with our limited senses and with our instruments. You know, we built mechanical devices to pick up radio waves and to use X-rays and things that we discovered ultimately. Well, how much other stuff is there out there that we don't see? And my thought is that the universe might even be, and I know this sounds a little crazy, but I think the universe might be a living entity unto itself. And that through all of this stuff, through Bigfoot and NDEs and UFOs and aliens and all of this, there's a thread of commonality. And that thread of commonality runs back to some source. And that's kind of the way I imagine the universe now. And
see, my thread of commonality to that, which is the more I do the show and the more I speak with various disparate researchers on various weird and wonderful phenomena, my thread of commonality comes back to what we know as the human consciousness, though we don't understand in any way.
yes,
now, that doesn't mean the human mind. I don't mean the human physical mind. I mean the unexplained consciousness. I think it goes some way to explaining. I say goes some way. There's no explanation, but it goes some way to explaining things like near-death experience. How near-death experiencers will talk of going to other realms where they might have the visions. They might have some of these. They see family members. There's often a lack of space-time. It's a similar sort of thing that they might only be. There was a story I heard. A girl, she went off a waterfall and her canoe went upside down and she was trapped underneath, drowned, had a near-death experience while they tried to revive her. She was unconscious for like 6 minutes.
She was a medical doctor.
But felt like she was having a near-death experience for 6 months or whatever. She went off and had this experience, but was actually only unconscious for minutes. And so there's this whole time shift thing as well. There's so much, and I can't even just continue this sentence I'm even saying to you, Terry, to be fair, because there's too much to explain. But that's what I'm starting to form as my thread, is that it's
I'm kind of on the same frequency, and I'll tell you why. Is that, I used to think of life experiences as being either subjective or objective, and there's a distinction between the two. But, really, when you think about it, do we ever have really an objective thought? Everything that we perceive is subjective. So maybe maybe an objective reality doesn't even exist. Maybe all there is our subjective realm between our ears and consciousness. And I think that consciousness does not reside within the human body, not within the brain, like I used to think. I don't think that that's that way at all. I think it may reside as a cloud or something over us, but I think it's independent.
Well, I guess the theory that I'm starting to hear more now is that the mind is not the creator of consciousness; it's a receiver of consciousness.
Absolutely. Strong scientific support for that. Are you familiar with a gentleman named Ray Hernandez?
Yes, certainly the name.
Yeah, Ray Hernandez wrote about an 800-page book. I used it to prop up my computer. It's called Beyond UFOs, The Science of Consciousness and Contact with Non-Human Intelligence. And it's an amazing book, but it talks all about consciousness and the connection between the two and those threads of commonality. So it's a bigger issue than we even imagine. And I wonder, how much of it we can't even grasp, we can't even understand. I know when I had my, did I talk about my experience with the entity when I was aboard the ship that when I locked eyes with the guy?
Yeah. And there was the telepathic
Yes.
back and forth. Yeah.
Yes. I won't repeat the story, but this kind of the object of the exercise was that this thing was, in my estimation, 500 rungs up the evolutionary ladder from where I'm at. And that was a huge epiphany. And that's, I think that's a hard thing for human beings to process, that, we're not the be all end all. We're not the smartest, the greatest, the fastest, the smartest. I mean, we're just not. And in the scope of things, we may turn out to be mediocre or less. So that opens the door to a whole lot of questions, not to mention, philosophical, theological, historical. I mean, just a ton of unanswered questions.
You can only perceive things through the mechanism by which we perceive things. You can't perceive something in a way that you can't perceive something that worded in such an ugly way. I'm sorry, but we only need to look into our backyards, into the animal kingdom, to look at birds, for example, who can pick up insects, who can pick up on frequencies of things that they communicate in ways. Bees can communicate. The birds that use electromagnetivity. Another one I saw interesting, it was actually just a magazine article, was birds that see an ultraviolet spectrum. And actually, if you were to look at something like a pigeon, the colors and markings that we see aren't the colors and markings that another pigeon sees when it looks at it. It sees something in a different spectrum. All very simple, and now we can understand that. But it's just this little glimpse into the notion that our perception, our human perception, isn't actually where it stops. And these are animals that we know and we can now study, but there's way more to it than that.
Spot on. Did I mention my third book I'm writing? Yeah, and I bring it up for a reason, and that is that all of this thought about consciousness and all these things I experienced, I wanted to write a book about something not related to my experience and not related to others' experience. But I've had two fascinations all my life: wild birds, which I fed, watered all my life, and I have a love for them, and a respect for bees. And I'll tell you, I got to tell you the story because it won't make sense if I don't.
It's funny that I would have just mentioned both birds and bees in conversation to you now as being examples of.
It is funny because they're hugely important to me. My grandparents were in northern Arkansas while we were in St. Louis, Missouri, 4 hours north or so, and my grandfather passed away when I was 8 years of age. And I went down for the funeral, my grandfather's funeral, and I'm 8. And my grandmother was in the kitchen, and my aunts and uncles, of course, everyone's all around. And my parents weren't there. They went to pick up some cousins in a neighboring town. And I heard this discussion in the kitchen about, well, who's going to tell the bees? And my grandmother said, it's my responsibility, I'll do it. And Kenneth says, I can do it for you. And she says, no, 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 I want to do it. And she brought out some black cloth and she cut 1 foot square sections of cloth, 10 of them, and folded them up. And she went and she poured herself a glass of sweet homemade wine. And I never knew we were drinking at, 8 a.m. We all piled into my Uncle Kenneth's great big 1959 Cadillac, and we drove to the edge of their farm and near a barn where they had their beehives, and they had 10 hives there. And I grew up eating their honey. It's delicious. And we all stopped and we stood back about 50 feet, and my grandmother walked right up to the bees, and they were all over her. They never stung her, never molested her at all. And she put a piece of black cloth on top of each one of these hives. And then she kind of cleared her throat and she stood back a couple of feet. And she had that thick Southern accent she always had. And she said, I want yuns to know Charles passed away yesterday. And we'll bury him tomorrow at Pine Knot Cemetery. And he wants you to know that he loved you. And he asks you not to leave. Please stay with us, but it'll be my hands or Kenneth's hands in your hive and not Charles anymore. And I was just, at 8 years old, I'm just perplexed. And, and then she's crying and she puts the glass of wine on top of the center hive, I guess for the bees. And we all pile back in the car and we head back. And I asked my Uncle Kenneth, I said, what do you got to tell the bees for? They're bugs. What's the big deal? And he says, no. He says, Terry, they're not bugs. He said, they're part of this farm. And he said, if you don't tell them, they might move away or they might die. And it's important that we do that. And that's actually a long-standing tradition that started in England, Ireland, Scotland, came across the United States, and is throughout Appalachia today and in the South today. I remembered that, and that's always stuck with me because I always thought, how can these things collectively have an intelligence that they don't have as an individual? And one day I was just playing on the computer, and this was 6 months ago because that memory crossed my mind. And I found John Zepka, Zepka, John Zepka. And John Zepka was a beekeeper in Massachusetts. I think Danville was the city. And he was known throughout the community as, quote, the man who had a way with bees. And John Zepka passed away. And his wife, following his instructions, went out to the hives and said basically what my grandmother said, I want you to know that John has passed and we want you to stay and not leave. And at the funeral, at Zepka's funeral, there came, when they were, after the funeral service in the church, they moved to the graveyard, to the grave itself, and they're doing the final ceremony, and 20,000 bees flew in. And they draped all over the headstone, all over the floral sprays, all over the canopy, over the coffin, and never buzzed, never molested anyone, sat there silent. And when the pastor had finished his sayings and shut the book, they rose up, weren't buzzing, rose up and flew off en masse and went back to the Zepka farm. And that's reported. If you go online and search for Zepka, you'll see it. It's in several different publications. So I think that
you see, that's a story.
Isn't that a great story? So that's the title of my third book, is going to be Who's Going to Tell the Bees? And I want to talk about that and animal consciousness, because I've had the thought, we've been around as human beings in our present form between 40 and 200,000 years, at least. Depends on who you ask. But let's just say we've been here 100,000 years. And, you know, we have domesticated all kinds of animals, and there's not a single animal in the animal kingdom we can sit down and have a conversation with. You know, my cat will understand, you know, let's eat. But, you know, other than that, you know, we communicate with one another in nonverbal ways, but I can't have a conversation with her. And that disparity in intellect, if I think about that thing that I met aboard ship being 500 rungs up the evolutionary ladder, there's got to be a gap. There's got to be difficulty in them to communicate with us. And that may be part of the mystery of all of this, is that, you know, we're just not smart enough yet.
You just can't perceive it. You
Yeah.
just can't perceive it. Does the ant that crawls between your feet know of this conversation? It's, you know, it's smart. It lives its life. It only needs to know what it needs to know. It doesn't know that you're stepping inside and going and putting your headphones on and calling me, because it can't perceive that. It's got no way of perceiving that information, no way of taking that information on, transmitting it. It means nothing to the ant.
Right.
Maybe we're just the ant.
It's an interesting topic, isn't it? I think we're going to see a lot more about consciousness. I think consciousness is kind of going to turn out to be the key to everything.
You know, they've mapped now the full human brain. We know as best as, well, certainly as best as we ever have, what every single part of the brain does. And not a single part of it controls consciousness.
Nope. I've read that. You know, I don't know if you've ever heard of a gentleman, he's in Texas, down in Houston, about 4 hours south of me. His name is Daryl Sims.
Oh, I've had him on the show, yeah.
Oh, you've had Daryl on, okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Daryl and I were talking one day, and he told me about and I may have mentioned this to you. We may have had this conversation. So stop me if we have, but he told the story about an experiencer who was taken, and she was on board a ship, and she remembers being levitated above a table, or no, so she saw a hologram above herself. And they asked her to point to where the human soul resides. And she said, I don't know. I don't. And they were emphatic. They were insistent, you know, point to where it is. Is it in the brain? Is it in the heart? Is it in the liver? Where does your soul reside? And she said, well, if I have a soul, it's a part of all of me. And evidently they weren't real satisfied with that answer. They were looking for something a little more specific. But according to Daryl, they have a great interest in human soul. Yep, they were curious research-wise.
It crosses so many of the phenomena that certainly that I talk about every day. Even in terms of religion, spirituality, meditation, things like out-of-body experience, things like remote viewing, things like time slips where people appear to see things in the past or things in the future. All these weird and wonderful stories, the things you hear on Coast to Coast, all these unexplained mysteries, actually, they can all be in the consciousness book if framed in a certain way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. And isn't it all crazy, wonderful stuff?
And I'd like to think we're moving towards a point where we can all we'll help each other, and we'll take tiny little steps. And it might not be us, it might be in generations to come. But
yeah, we're not headed in the right direction, it seems like at the moment. But, you know, I would hope that at some point in our history, in the history of humanity, we can all raise our consciousness somewhat and see ourselves as, you know, as spiritual beings, and set aside some of the petty differences. One of the things, you know, Betty is the entity that's communicated with me since I was age 4. And one of the things she said to me that stuck with me was that human beings need to stop thinking regionally and start thinking globally. and this is a particularly sensitive subject in this country, but she said that borders should be dissolved. You should act as one global entity, not as a fractured and divided collection of countries. And I think of things like disparity of wealth. I can think of a dozen things and then, like I say, that's a very divisive topic, but I could see that really making a difference in the world for the better if that could be somehow arranged,
Though the flip side of that, of course, is in this world where we're now able to just speak between London and Dallas, in the press of some buttons, in the ability to broadcast and to share stories and photographs and memories and studies and papers internationally. At least I feel now that where 50 years or so ago, or clearly less, stories of take consciousness, for example, stories coming out of India wouldn't have reached our ears. Stories of the shamans of South America wouldn't have reached us. Now, actually, we have almost this borderless thing, which is, I guess, the internet, really, that we are a little bit more globally connected now, where all of a sudden you realize that, okay, I've never heard anyone who's had an experience like me, but look, here's this guy out here, and here's that guy out there. And now I've joined this group, this website, this forum, this community of like-minded individuals who are striving for the same thing, who've experienced the same thing, who are having memories that are triggering memories in me. So in a way we are starting to reach a global discussion.
Very well said. Yeah, I mean, that's a very positive outlook on it in that regard. And I agree with you. Maybe we're taking steps in the right direction. I just hope we can continue on that path and stay positive and work for the benefit of humanity as a whole. This virus thing changed the equation too, in ways that we won't even be aware of for 20 more years. They can do a lot of research and simulate a lot of things in a laboratory. But the thing that they can't research, there's a component to research that they can't duplicate, and that is the passage of time. So, we don't know. We can guesstimate given the trajectory of where things are going, what path it might take, but really it's an unknown because there is no nothing we can use to duplicate the passage of time.
Terry, I love speaking with you so much.
I've had great conversation, just like last time. I enjoy it myself, Mark. It's great. Anyone that has a question, I answer every single email. I make a pot of coffee every morning, and I devote. I fall behind on my website because of it, but I think it's more important. Anybody that would like to contact me can just email me at terrylovelace@gmail.com. And I promise I will return your email. If I don't, send me another one, and I guarantee I will. My books are Incident at Devil's Den, and Incident at Devil's Den is available in a paperback and in a Kindle version. And I also did an audiobook in my own words. And then The Reckoning has just been out a couple of months, and it hit #1 in genre in February, I'm happy to say. And that's available in paperback and Kindle. And I'm also in the process of making, the sound studio was closed because of the virus thing. So I'm a little behind with the audiobook, but I'm about half done with it. So hopefully I'll have an audiobook for The Reckoning in a few weeks. So stay tuned. And I'm on Facebook at Terry Lovelace. I'm on Facebook at Incident at Devil's Den. And I'm on Facebook at Devil's Den Radio. And I have a podcast, Devil's Den Podcast. We just made our 4th and 5th episodes, which I don't think we have loaded yet, but we will have shortly. So, tune in, visit. Love to hear from you. I appreciate each and every one of you.
Terry, what an honour to speak with you again. The new book is absolutely awesome. I recommend everybody go and buy it and study it and follow all the work that you're doing, including all the future books that you'll be coming out as well. It's been an absolute privilege to speak with you once more. Thank you for taking the time a second time to come and speak with me. It's been an honour. Thank you so much, Terry.
Thank you so much, too. Peer Beyond the Veil is just the best. I enjoy it very much. Thank you.
Have a good night, Terry. Thanks.
I will. Good night. Thank you all.
Peer Beyond the Veil has been written and presented by myself, Mark Watson, as part of the Fearscape Media Network. Music and soundtracks are credited and licensed to Purple Planet and to Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons. All rights are reserved by our parent company, MLW Publishing. You can follow us at facebook.com/Peer Beyond the Veil, or on Twitter at Peer Beyond the Veil or at Peer Beyond 2020. Please click the like and subscribe buttons when you see them, most importantly wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps us to attract the attention we need to keep the show going, to get the guests that you all want to hear from, and to help more and more people